Also, welcome for Tzvi.
Yes.
Yeah, Tzvi. Shalom Aleichem. Good. All right. So we're going to continue on Mem Zayin on the base at the very bottom. We're about to finish the daf, this daf. And as I said last week, we're now having gone through all of these permutations about money and kinyan and all. We talked last week about Reb Shimon, and he was a Bava Metzia with the Tanakama, but Reb Shimon made the sweeping statement, notwithstanding everything we've learned, Kol HaKesef Shebiyado Yodo Al Yona. In other words, this is the age-old axiom that possession is 9/10 of the law. In other words, if you have the money, then Yodo Al Yona, then you're a business. But the upshot of that, we said last week, was that supports. Remember the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Midoraisa is money kona or Mashiach kona. So Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Because Rabbi Yochanan says money is kona. Rabbi Shimon says whoever has money is alel yoina. Put two and two together. If you have the money, then you're in control, i.e., the kinyan happened. So he holds like Rabbi Yochanan that the kinyan is midoraisa, because remember, the general consensus is that money does not establish the transaction. The product transferring hands cements the deal. But here we see Reb Shimon says, you have the money, you have the deal. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. So that's how we came out at the end, that in that machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish was the machlokes between Reb Shimon and the Tanakama, whereas Reb Shimon held like Rabbi Yochanan, and the Tanakama held like Rish Lakish. So today we're going to pick up on that to some degree, but we're going to start off a little bit with something very interesting, which we touched on a comment, and I said we would talk about it. And then we'll get back to this machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish.
Excuse me, Rabbi. I must have missed the page. Where are we, Mem?
We're at the very bottom of Mem Zayin Amud Beis. The last couple, 3 lines is where we're going to start.
Okay. Thank you.
It's going to start with Tanan. It's the last word of the 4th line from the bottom. Tanan. We learned in our Mishnah. So what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says makes the following statement. The Mishnah says that if a person, just as very general, that so the Mishnah says, reading from the Mishnah, Nosan lo mos, if one party gave, in other words, the buyer gave the seller money, the Lord Moshe Chaimenu Peiros, and he didn't make Mashicha, right? This is before the discussion, Midoraisa, not Midoraisa, just the Mishnah, that if a person gave money and he didn't move the Peiros, then he can retract from the deal. So what does that tell us? That tells us that at this point in time in our discussion, the money, of course, doesn't make the kinyan, because we are of the opinion that money cannot conclude a deal, so the money doesn't make the kinyan. Nevertheless, there was a physical act of money transferring hands, but Yochel Lachzaboy, he's allowed to retract. Then the Mishnah makes this statement, this powerful statement, Aval Amru, but Chazal, the rabbis tell us, not Minatayr, the rabbis tell us, Mishipora, Me'an Shador Mabul, Midor HaFlaga, he who punished the Dor Mabul and the Dor HaFlaga, meaning the Rebbeinu Shalom, who also lahafriya, he will punish Mimishe Naome B'diburo, someone who doesn't stand by his word will be punished just like the Rebbeinu Shalom punished the Dor Mabul, Dor HaFlaga. That's an amazing statement. It's a powerful statement. And we have to understand what it means. What does it mean that someone who doesn't stand by his word, so in other words, in Jewish life and in Jewish law, a word means something. But keep in mind that the context of this, the avol, is the way it's referred to, avol, meaning that's the punishment. But it comes on the heels of the statement of someone who made a deal and transferred money and didn't make a Mashiach Yachal Lachzor. So let's be very careful. You and I, Jay, we made a deal. I'm going to buy your car, and I'm going to give you money. I gave you the money. I didn't get into the car. I didn't move the car. So on the surface, do we have a deal? I mean, we verbally said what we wanted to do. I gave you money. Says the Mishnah tells us, Yachal Lachzor b'o. I can say, Jay, my wife doesn't like a red car. Forget about it. I want to undo the deal. Yachal Lachzor b'o. Says the Mishnah, you know what? You can do that, but keep in mind that the Rabbi Shalom is going to pay you many times over for undoing the deal. But the deal was done with transfer of something, but not a kinyan. So let's be clear. There was something transferred, i.e. money, but money isn't good enough. Money doesn't make the deal. I had to get into that car and drive it, and I didn't drive it. So we're telling Minat Torah, you can undo the deal, but the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't like when you do that. That's what this Mishnah is telling us. I don't hear you, Jay.
You can undo the deal. Both sides.
The buyer, can say, forget about it. I don't like the car. I don't want the car. But I gave you money, but the money doesn't mean anything because the money isn't the kinyan.
So the seller can also do that.
Exactly.
He always can do it by giving back the money.
The seller can. Now, if you hold again, I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but if you hold like Rabbi Yochanan, then there was a deal because he got the money. So the question is, can he undo the deal? If you certainly hold like Rosh Lakish, no question he can undo the deal because there was no Mashiach. But the Mishnah is telling us that although there's not really a final deal yet, don't do it because the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't like when you make a deal and undo it. But the deal was done with something transacted, not just I say to you and you say to me, because we're going to see a distinction between if you and I just have a verbal conversation, or we have a verbal conversation coupled with some action, even if that isn't sort of the final action.
So why would the Rebbeinu Shalom get upset because you backed out? I mean,
so what does that tell you? It tells you that when two Yidden come together and have the intent to make a deal and express so verbally that a verbal deal has strength. Now, lahavdil. In civil law, in our common law, a verbal deal, except in several jurisdictions, there are a few jurisdictions where a verbal deal has traction. But most of the time it doesn't because there was something called the statute of fraud. The statute of fraud means I can come to court and say, we had a deal. Where is it? Oh, we talked about it. So there's no way of proving it. So therefore, under common law, since you can't prove it, it's just simply my word against yours. How are you going to prove it? Now, there are a couple of jurisdictions that say that it is valid. The question is how you prove it. I mean, that's a big issue, how you prove it. But for the most part, it's not a deal. However, the Rabbi Shalom, he writes it down. Rabbi Shalom knows that you and I just made a deal. There's no physical evidence, but the Rabbi Shalom knows. So this is saying, Chavalevi, you made a deal with your friend. Don't go back on it. Boss of Adam is not going to be able to prosecute you, but I will prosecute you. Just like I punished Dora Mabel, I'm going to punish you. I mean, and that's the psychological push behind why should you and I just talk idly and make a deal and then say, oh, it was for the fun of it.
So Hashem is sensitive to the fact that one person is going to get hurt if you
Correct.
back out.
Correct. That's the point. But the problem is that in a I won't say a lawless society, but in a society that doesn't have the appreciation of saying, well, if two people sat together and made a deal, it should be a deal. And because it's so easy to commit fraud, we can't logically commit and say that there was a deal. We can't do it. So this is the problem. But anyway, this is the Mishnah. So now let's take a look at the Gemara on Mem Beis and Mid Beis. That's the Mishnah. Tanan, we learned the Mishnah 3 lines from the bottom. Aval, Amru, the Aval, Misha Para, Midura, Maval, also from the Menu, She'eno Mebidiburo. Okay, that is someone who doesn't stand by his word will be punished. Now, here's the Gemara's discussion. If you hold like Rabbi Yochanan, that merely transferring money midoraisa makes the deal, I understand why there is an aval mishapara, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, a deal was already transacted because money changed hands. That's all you need. So if you hold like Rabbi Yochanan, then the mishapara makes sense because you're undoing a deal that was already done. But if you hold like Rish Lakish, that Mos isn't Kone, you need Mashiach, am I called be Aval? Why is there an Aval? What did you do wrong here? You didn't transact because money has no, I mean, okay, it's maybe symbolic, but money doesn't make a deal. Why should someone be held accountable to a Mishapara for transacting money when the Torah itself says nothing was done? The Torah says there's no deal. So, in other words, if you're going to say, I'm a Torah Jew and I'm a Yerushalayim and I don't want to overstep when I'm supposed to overstep, and you and I had a discussion and that made the deal, okay. So that's Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, I gave you money. Remember, I gave you something. I gave you money, and money, minaraisa, is enough. Therefore, if you go back on money, then Mishapara. But according to Rish Lakish, that nothing ever happened. Giving money is like blowing in the wind. It has no effect on anything. Then why is there a Mishapara? By the way, I remember as a kid that when we would have, we would talk amongst ourselves, even not in the Gemara, we would talk amongst ourselves, then those who knew a little bit of learning would use this phrase, and they would say, you're going to have a mishapara on you. In other words, the God is going to visit all the negative things. It was just an idle thing that kids would say because they knew a little bit they were dangerous because they knew something, but they didn't know what it meant. Oh, you're going to have a mishapara on you. So the term mishapara became synonymous with something very, very nasty and negative. Mishapara is God's wrath on you that he will punish you. It's no small thing to say that he's going to punish you like the Dora Mabel or the Dora Flaga. I mean, those were, Dora Mabel wiped out the world. Dora Flaga was a major punishment. And I'm going to be visited with that punishment? I better clean up my act. So why should this event incur the wrath of the Rabbeinu Shalom that he should punish us like the Dora Mabel, Dora Flaga? So the Gemara makes a very good point. I understand Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says there's a deal, don't go back. But according to Rish Lakish, there was never a deal. Why should there be a Mishapara? That's the question. Answers the Gemara, bottom line, Mishum Devarim.
So, Rabbi,
Yeah.
where did the Gemara get such a statement that? How do they know that God's going to do all of this? I mean, it's not referenced in terms from a pasuk or something else. Where did they derive that this is going to happen to somebody?
Okay, so it's a good question. So here you have the great scholars, the Tanoim, the Amoraim, were sitting around and they were clearing into the words of the Tanoim and the words of the Gemara, and they were saying, okay, so we have this circumstance, and what should be, in other words, remember, we believe that that these Tanoim and Amoraim had a certain level of Ruach HaKodesh, or understanding, a deep understanding, so that they could establish law, right? How does the Shulchan Aruch come about? Because you have Gedolim, you have who are Yer Shemayim, and we believe that they have the what's called the Ruach Chochmah, right? So okay. So your question is, how do they come about knowing that this should be what it is? And the answer is because when they went deep into the understanding of the Gemara, they said, here we're discussing buying and selling, which is, these are like mundane activities, right? I'm going to give you money. I'll move the Mashiach, I'll move the object. I said, is this just verbiage, or does it really mean something? So the Chazal put teeth into the language. In other words, they made, this isn't just idle chatter. I'll sell it to you, you'll sell it to me, we'll back out, just that the other. So with their Ruach Chochmah, they said that, something, the Rabbi Shalom is not happy. I mean, again, this is something that came about as a result of
so they don't have a reference. They can't quote a pasuk somewhere.
No, there's no pasuk.
That would back this up, because it's a pretty severe accusation. I mean,
absolutely, it is, and that's where, again, we rely on the Emunas Chachamim, that they had the insight to say that this it's not just idle, that when you do something, you have to be held accountable. And again, they use sources from the Torah and different things, because the Torah doesn't say, this Mishapara, but it's a rabbinic chiddush that the Rabbi Shalom will not be happy with people who go back on their word. And again, we're going to see from the pasuk that we're going to in Parshas Vayikra, which we're going to quote very shortly, that maybe that'll give us some insight on why. It doesn't say that there's a Mishapara, but it'll give us. We'll discuss that there is some insight from the pasuk, what the pasuk means to tell us. Okay, so we'll try to answer that better shortly, but the question is a good one. Where does it come from? It comes from the Emunas Chachamim, that they have, that they said, something, you can't just idly between people make it up and then say nothing happens. Okay.
I have to wonder, so in a sense, what we're saying here is, in terms of the specific instances, to say money as a payment, l'alacha, it doesn't, unless there's some Kenyan, other real Kenyan, et cetera, doesn't totally seal the deal, but in Shemayim, in a sense, it does.
Right.
And so I wonder if, in a way, this is almost like a great preparation for the reality of the world today, where we went from coins that had a literal value, even though they became a representative thing as money. So you were using it based on the number stamped on the coin and not based on the weight of silver in it.
Right.
To the progression, though, to paper money not backed by gold, to checks, to electronic transfers, where these things become more and more and more virtual, and yet the transaction is essentially the same. And so by saying a money transaction, whatever it is, it may not be enforceable, but it still matters. May have been like sort of the hindsight, great preparation for the modern world.
You're absolutely correct. Now, I don't think that was Chazal's motive, but you're absolutely correct. Once we've established in hard currency that this is the halacha, that this is what has to happen, then we extrapolate. I'll give you an example. For instance, the halacha, your chilul Shabbos, if you make age, you make fire. Well, today we don't make fire, but we turn on electricity. We do things that our Chazal tell us is like age. Like you say, it's virtual, it's not the same and everything. But if the underpinning is clear as to what it is, then the only question is, as we get further and further along and we develop things that, let's say, the Torah never really established in black letter, that's where the machlokes is this the same? Is electricity really the same as fire? Well, others will argue, no, it's not age, it's not literal, it's not age, so it shouldn't be. This becomes, unfortunately, the gray area where we have to rely on Emunas Chachamim, on our Paiskim and our teachers, to say, yes, this is as much fire as real fire. Now,
Yeah, it's
today,
actually a great example because we went from the first round of electric stoves was these red coils. At least it grows red like a fire. And now
right,
you've got the
today,
induction stuff. You don't even see
you
anything.
don't even see it, right? But now look further. Today, we have, according to halacha, novel ways of doing things on Shabbos, which it's almost unprecedented. You can speak on Shabbos on a phone. There's a Shabbos phone, or you can do other things that. If I were to ask you, can I ever call you on Shabbos? And you would say, are you kidding? There's no way. I mean, can I ever drive a vehicle? Can I ever do anything on Shabbos? Of course not. But we've established that, and again, this is where we have to rely on a halacha and emunas chachamim, and is that they have to nuance the difference between what is an isser and what is not an isser. So sometimes it's okay, it's maris ayin, you shouldn't do it, but it's not an isser. So when it comes to money and those kinds of things, people say, oh, the Jews are, especially from Jews, oh, you're stuck in the 2nd century, you're stuck in whatever, because you go back to the Tanoim when it was so rudimentary. It was an agrarian society and it was rudimentary. There was no sophistication. And today, 2,000 years later, you're going to tell me I can do or not do something based on what a rabbi said, 2,000 years ago. Again, so in what we call that is, where we are of the mind that the Torah is the source, and we just have we have to have the chachma to extrapolate what the Torah tells us, not to make new law and say that was then and this is now. So that's the bridge of modernity that we as frum Jews have to cross, and others who are they think that they're equally, and I'm not arguing that they're not religious or they're not equally fervent, take a different view and say, no, I can't extrapolate from that halacha that you can't do this today. And again, we rely on our sources. And at the end of the day, even as the Gemara says, teku, sometimes even in the real Torah world, we can't reach a conclusion. Sometimes there's such a gray area that there will continue to be a machlokes. I will tell you with certainty that, for instance, Rabbi Hyatt, gave Piskei Halacha that other sections of Frum Yidden didn't hold by, because they didn't hold that his understanding of a certain point of halacha can be extrapolated to something else. Ramesha is Ramesha, and other poskim are other poskim. I'm only saying that shows you that there isn't necessarily a clear-cut picture or a clear-cut view about where everybody agrees to one thing. So in our realm here in the Gemara, we see that no less personage than Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, two Gedalim, they're diametrically opposed to each other on a basic tenet of what concludes a deal. I mean, that's so basic to our understanding of commerce under frum law. I mean, it makes all the difference in the world, whether money is kinda or whether Mashiach is kinda. How do you go from there to you build a whole Gemara, a whole empire, a whole world on these two concepts, and yet they are so completely different. Anyway, so what does the Gemara answer? Why, so the kasha is, according to Rish Lakish, who says you need Mashiach, and there was no Mashiach, why is there a Mishapara? Okay, the rabbis who sat around and said we're going to make a Mishapara on someone who doesn't conclude a deal, why, if you hold like Rish Lakish, is there a Mishapara? There was never a deal. So the answer is, and that's why I emphasized at the outset, that our Mishnah, when the Mishnah says Mishapara, let me read it again. The language of the Mishnah is very important. The language of that first Mishnah, Mem Dalet and Aleph, you can take a look, says, Nosen lo mos v'lo moshech hamenu peres yochel lachzor. If he gave money, but he didn't move the peres, he can be lachzor. But there's a mishapara. So this Mishnah, this Gemara, says that the Mishapara comes about because there was a physical act, albeit not an act that I hold to be conclusive, because I don't hold for money, but there was an act. Says the Gemara here in Mem Zayin and Beis, you know why there's a Mishapara according to Rish Lakish? Mishum Devarim, because there was mere words. And to Jay, to your point, we don't need an act anymore. Not even an act of money. Just you and I sitting in a closed room without anybody hearing except the Rabbi Shalom. And I said to you, I'm buying your car, and you told me $1,000. That's the deal. We have now made a deal, and accordingly, says the Gemara, you can be punished with a Mishapara for merely making that deal without any kind of transaction, not even money. Because according to Rish Lakish, money does nothing. The answer is you don't have to do anything as long as you said it. So this is now a powerful point to us, is that the Mishnah says you have to do something. Okay, you moved money, and therefore there's a Mishapara. So the kasha was, according to Rish Lakish, you didn't do it. Money means nothing. So the answer is you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. Forget about the money. Just merely speaking out between me and you what our deal is enough to cement the deal. And if you pull out of the deal, you get a Mishapara. That is almost mind-boggling.
Is there any relationship between this and a neder, like nedarim? When somebody makes a neder, it's only one person saying it,
right?
And it has a certain amount of strength to it. So is this perhaps, my earlier question, is this perhaps similar or to some extent a mini neder that's made here?
Jay, it takes the neder to a new level, because not only do you get punished when you make a neder, and that's a good point. When someone wants to back out of a neder, we have to have ataris nedarim.
Right.
We have to go through all kinds of hoops to undo just simple words. All we did was made a neder. It's words. Now we're saying, forget about a neder. If you and I just discussed it and shook hands or made a deal, there was never a neder, but you're still liable.
So maybe the Chachamim view this as the same as a neder.
Right. So they view it as an implied neder. In other words, with a neder, you actually said Hashem's name. You said, "Okay, I promise, I swear," whatever it was, whatever the
more than halfway there.
You're more than halfway there. Now, if in a neder you need to have magic words, okay, I make a shvua or I promise or whatever. I didn't promise you. I just said, Jay, I like your car. I want your car. I'll pay you $1,000 for the car. And you said, okay. Did we say a neder? Did we say anything magical that using the Rebbeinu Shalom's name, Chas v'Shalom, did we desecrate his name?
It's not the exact format, but it has the same intention.
Same intention, exactly right. So that's why I'm saying it's taking neder to another level. And now, in the case of a neder, you really have to do things like Hator Sodom, you have to do things to undo it. Here, the only way, now, this is an interesting point. What happens if both sides retract? Is there a Mishapara? If I say, Jay, I have second thoughts, and you say to me, Tuvia, you're right, maybe we should just not do the deal. So both of us consented to undoing the deal, then arguably there's no Mishapara, because I didn't violate you and you didn't violate me. We agreed that it was a mekach tos. You can have a mekach tos. Mekach tos means a mistake, what we like to call an annulment, right? So an annulment means that we're going to step back as if it never happened, because by a get, for instance,
nobody gets hurt.
Nobody gets hurt, right? And the good example is a get, is that by a get there has to be, now we say that al pi halacha there is no such thing as an annulment. Let's say in kedushin, that's a different story because it's isurin. It deals with isurin. But why can't we have an annulment in a deal, in a regular commercial deal? Do I have to go through hoops to undo a deal? You and I agreed to make a deal. You and I both agree not to make a deal. So there should be no mishapara in that particular case. But where one person backs out and the other person said, but I thought we had a deal, then we have a mishapara. Then we have a mishapara. So the Gemara here in a way is really powerful. You know why, according to Rosh Lakish, there's a mishapara? Because they spoke. Forget about the fact that there was no transaction, mishicha, money. The Mishnah talks about a transaction with money. The Gemara here says, forget about money. The fact that the two people spoke it out is enough to cement the deal in the eyes of the Rabban Shalom that if one person backs out, it's a mishapara. That's really a powerful thing.
Another interesting twist to it, though, which is that I believe the number is a sixth. I don't think it's like you add a fifth or something like that. There's a certain amount of excess profit. If you go beyond a certain amount,
one sixth,
then
that's
essentially the
that's
person. Right. So let's say I go to Ruvain and say, I want to buy your car, and we agree, and he says, okay, it's $1,000. So if I come around and say, I talked to my wife, she doesn't want a red car, that's me going back on the deal. But on the other hand, if I say, Ruvain, I just checked the Blue Book value and it's $500. So you could charge me $600, would be okay, but to charge me $1,000, I should never have agreed to that, and you should have never offered that. I want out.
And the Torah says you can get out without any complication or punishment because ono is
right.
It overarches.
Okay. So that right. So exactly. So therefore, Reuben doesn't have to like it. Reuben could even be upset because he thought he had a great deal going here, but really I'm then in my rights to go out, and I don't have to. I'm not guilty of anything. If anything, I'm saving Reuven from being guilty of Ona because they canceled the deal.
That's right, and Ona overarches anything else. So there's no mishapara where there's an Ona. That now remember that with Ona, so the halacha is this: if it's less than a sixth, no retraction. If it's a sixth, it's optional. If it's more than a sixth, it's mandatory. Now, mandatory means I can say to you, give me back my money above the sixth, but I want to make the deal. I still want to make the deal. Or I don't want to make the deal. But if it's just a sixth, you can't back out of the deal. You can only get your money. So in other words, there's three grades of oino. Under a sixth, nothing. A sixth, money. Over a sixth, no deal. But the parties can still say, you know what, my mistake. I'll give you back the difference, but let's continue with the deal. And the other one says, fine, very good. But you're right. So if you back out willfully, sua sponte, as we say, without any real reason, mishapara. You can't do that. But if you have a reason, because the Torah says there's something called a noah that you're not allowed to do, then now we have the doors open. We can either fix the oinah and make the deal, or I can say, my wife didn't want a red car anyway, and there's oinah, I'm out, and you're allowed to be out. So that's a very good point. So those are the different, and again, oftentimes there's more than one halachic factor to consider. It isn't just, we can make the deal or not make the deal. Oh, what about this? Oh, what about ribbis? Oh, wait a minute. Oh, there's ribbis in the deal. Now, so in other words, you have to sort of check every box to make sure that the deal is kosher from every standpoint and that you didn't make a mistake. And if you made one mistake, that can undo the deal without repercussion. Sometimes you can just have to fix it, but other times you can say, I don't want to fix it. I want out of the deal. So it makes, al pi halacha, it makes two people, any deal has to sort of have merit from a lot of different standpoints, which is why
Rabbi, we spend page after page after page describing what is the basis. We disprove time after time after time that kesef is the foundation for a deal. We have prescriptions as to how deals are made, and then we sit and say, well, if two people are sitting together and they agree on this, then it's a deal, and they're going to be punished by Shemayim, but they can retract this deal. I don't understand why we went through all of that foundation, and then we come up with the fact that, well, you can do it, but it's it's not right if you back out. But if you back out, you can back out, and God will punish.
Right. So you touch on an age-old question, Michael, and that is, so what are we doing learning? I mean, again, in the time of the Tanoim and Amoraim, the Gemara was the halacha, right? What the majority, whether it was the Tanakama, whoever it was, the majority came to a view, and that was the halacha. It was only hundreds of years later, 1,000 years in the case of Shulchan Aruch, where the Chazal, the rabbis at the time said, you know what, let's take all the collection of the discussions in the Gemara and let's establish what we call the Shulchan Aruch, meaning the black letter law. So to your point, Talmudic discussion, Talmudic exegesis, Talmudic back and forth it wasn't an idle exercise. It was an exercise in trying to understand what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants from us and what should be the halacha. So having gone through the first 40-some blocks, 45, 47 blocks of this particular Gemara on many of the discussions that you just mentioned about money and whether money works or doesn't work, it wasn't just a random discussion. It was a discussion, la halacha, between great minds, what's the proper way of Jews to conduct themselves in business? Bava Metzia is about business. How do we conduct ourselves in business so that we're not over alav in the Torah and that we're good to each other and that we do that? Okay, so you're right. I mean, there isn't one size fits all, and we have many, many discussions, and then we have what looks like an understanding, and then I said, wait a minute, the Gemara is going to upend that again, and that's the beauty of the Torah, is that we're going back and we're exercising our minds to understand, oh, we have it, now we got it. Wait a minute, there's yet another view that we have to take into account. So that's what we've been doing and continue to do when we learn the Gemara, is that, right, so now we think we've pretty much got it under control. We got it under control. We know that la halacha, money can't make the transaction for the reasons that we've said. It's got to be the product. It's got to be an exchange of the actual item for many of the reasons that we discussed. Not everybody agrees with that, but that's kind of where we are. So now we think we've got it under control. Now the Gemara at the last second says, but wait a minute. You think you have a deal, maybe you do. But if you don't have a deal, then you think you can walk away. No, you can't walk away. Because if you've made a deal, even verbally, even though you have not closed the deal by doing the actual transaction, you still violate a principle. Now, maybe you and I, if we back away, or you or I, either of us, are back away, okay, fine, I back away, I'm not worried about it. Mishapara doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Let's just say that I'm a frum guy, but I'm not worried about a Mishapara. Okay, then we undo the deal and we move on and we decide, do we make another deal or do I make a deal with somebody else? But the Gemara just wants us to understand that even at the last moment, when you think you've got it all under control, you understand all the sides and you see how it comes out, I want to introduce, says the Gemara, there's still yet one other factor, which isn't necessarily a commercial factor. It's an ecclesiastical factor, I'll call it, because it has to do with the Rebbeinu Shalom. Remember, the parties here, we say that in Kedushin, when a man marries a woman, there's three parties to the Kedushin, right? The man, the woman, and the Rebbeinu Shalom. In commerce, are there three parts? Michael, I want to buy your car. What does the Rebbeinu Shalom have to do with my buying your car? I buy your car, I give you money, you give me the car. Says the Gemara that the Rebbeinu Shalom still has a chelik in that deal, not directly, but indirectly, that he wants to see two Yidden be fair to each other. And if one of them is unfair to each other, then the Rebbeinu Shalom says, now I'm going to interject. But that's an ecclesiastic thing, not a commercial thing, Michael, that you're pointing out.
Rabbi, why isn't it as simple as saying, okay, if you sit down and do that, you need two kosher witnesses, and then you got a deal, and then we've witnessed it, and then there's no backing out, and that's everything, and stop draining a cup with all this stuff.
We do say that. We do say that, but what happens if you and I are sitting alone, there's no witnesses, and I need a car, and I say, Michael, you've got a car, I'll pay you $1,000 for the car. You don't say to me, hold on to you, let me get witnesses.
But we have the recipe. If you drove off the car, as you said, if you drove off the car, you got a deal. But
Right.
you're going to sit there and talk about it. That's not a deal. So why is it all of a sudden a deal?
Because as the Gemara says, because words matter. Devarim
Yeah,
matters.
but you can back out of it, so words don't matter.
But we were just started this with he handed him $1,000 in cash, and so we're saying the cash itself doesn't count, but the words count. You can tell me that the words don't count, and therefore, and that the cash doesn't count. Now all of a sudden, commerce is falling apart.
So here's the point, Menashe. Rabbi Yochanan says you gave him money. Rav Shlokish says I didn't give him. I didn't do Mashiach. Why do I get penalized if under my view? You know why you get penalized? Because you said you spoke the word. You don't need the Mashiach. Now, again, this is the progression. I understand your frustration, Michael, but at the same time, al pi halacha, deals aren't simple. In other words, that's why I say you got to check every box. After you made the deal, check the box, no rivets. Check the box, no. Check the box, the two parties were of sound mind. And in other words, you've got so many boxes to check after you make the deal that it's almost as if the deal can never happen because somewhere along the line you missed the box.
But Rabbi, we checked the parameters, all the parameters. We tested them multiple times.
Yeah.
Here we're wiping out all that and saying you sit in a room and you say, okay, and I hand you over the money and you don't like it, you turn it back. It's not a deal, according to Rabbi Yochanan. So why are we allowing that minority view to override what the established factors that we had?
And the answer is because Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, you meant Rish Lakish, not Rabbi Yochanan, but because Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are equal in weight to understanding the Gemara. And while we understand the Gemara according to Rabbi Yochanan perfectly, Rish Lakish is the one who says, but wait a minute, you have to look at my side of the equation and understand that mid'oraisa, not just rabbinic, mid'oraisa, nothing ever happened. There was no Mashiach. Why? To your question, why should I be penalized with a Mishapara when I did nothing? The answer is because you did something. You concluded with words a deal that you now want to renege, which shows you that words matter. Doesn't have to be a shvua, doesn't have to be a neder, doesn't have to be anything complicated. The fact that of my own free will, you and I sat down without witnesses, without any other adornments, and said, I'd like to buy your car. And he says, of course, I'll sell you my car for $1,000. You would think that, okay, and by the way, lahavdil, that's why the non-Jewish world, 97%, 95% says, no deal. You can't tell me I want to buy your car and then say we had a deal. Now, those who say you have a deal, I mean, I'm going to ask you a question. The people in Florida have more years Shemayim than the people in New York or Maryland because the people in Florida say it is a deal. There is a deal verbally in Florida, but not in Maryland. So are the people in Florida more attuned to the Rabbi Shalom and to Jewish law? I mean, I don't know the origins of why Florida says yes. I don't know, but in Florida, where I practice, if I can somehow show that there was a verbal agreement, which is going to be tough to do without Adam, then we have a deal. In other words, if the court says, I believe you and not the other guy, that there was a verbal agreement, the court can finalize a deal between two people verbally, but that opens the door to fraud. That's why in Jewish law, I mean, we believe in a higher authority. So we're going to say, you know what? I don't need someone to legally, maybe I can't enforce my deal, but you're a frum yid and you believe in a mishapara, you believe that the chachamim admonished you, don't make idle words. Don't say idle words that you can't fulfill, even though there's no deal. It's still a mishapara.
It's still not. I still don't
understand. It's a tough act.
understand.
I'm going to agree with you, Michael, that this is a tough act.
But I still don't understand if there's a propensity for people to lie, and even I'm a good Jew and all that, but there's a propensity to do what's in their best interest. Why not mandate either that it has to be done between two witnesses, or it has to be in writing and signed by both sides?
And I couldn't agree with you more. What we're doing is we're saying if you're a Jew, you're on your honor. You have in other words, the rest of the world may say no problem, walk away. But the Chachamim, now you'll ask an interesting question. Why did they sit around and come up with this Mishapara? Why did they do that? I mean, if it's totally mina shemayim, why did they come up with a Mishapara? They set a standard for you and I that maybe we can't meet. You and I are good Jews, but maybe we can't.
Rabbi, it's Jewish guilt.
That's a very good point. It's a very good point. But you see that this Mishapara has teeth to it. It's not just idle talk. People got very scared and said, you know what? I don't want a Mishapara. I don't want the possibility that the Rebbe Shlomo is going to punish me or my progeny because I foolishly just spoke idle words. And again, I don't know that I can reconcile it better by saying that we as Torah Jews have to follow halacha. There are many Jews who say, I follow what the Torah says, but when the rabbis make an edict that doesn't make sense, I'm not going to follow it. Many Jews say that. I am not going to minimize that. Many Jews say, I can't follow a divrei chachamim that I can't rationalize. I'm telling you, Michael, it's hard to rationalize. It's very hard to rationalize that two people who just sit together, maybe they meant it, maybe they didn't mean it, but they actually spoke out a deal, and one guy said, oh, I have a deal. He's going to be hurt. And because he's hurt, the Rebbe Shlomo says, Mishapara. I mean, does that make sense? Again, in the real world.
In everything we do as Jews, we map to ensure that as best we can that this doesn't happen.
Correct.
And this is just the obverse of all that.
And you're absolutely
and it makes
right.
no sense.
You're right. If the Torah is al pishnayim edim yakum davar, that's why we have an established rule that you have to have edim, and you have to now edim and all of that are halachic dictates. Mishapara, the Mishapara is it's ecclesiastical. I mean, is it a halacha? No, there's no halacha that says you have a Mishapara. There's a halacha that says if you have two witnesses and you violate, that you can be punished, right? Edim zomim, whatever it happens to be. So a Mishapara falls short of that. It doesn't say that
it becomes a deterrent, really, so people to think twice. Don't hurt the other guy.
Exactly.
That's all.
Exactly.
We don't know if it ever really happened.
That's
Just
exactly
know
right.
that it's sitting there to remind you not to hurt the other guy.
And maybe you didn't mean to hurt him. You really meant to make a deal, but then you went home and your wife said to me, what did you just do? I don't want a red car. In other words, you had a full intention to say, Jay, I want to make a deal. We're all good. So when you backed out, you didn't back out maliciously because I wanted to fool you because, I'm not buying your car. I changed my mind. Says the Torah, says the Gemara, that devorim matter. So now we have to be on our best behavior, that anything coming out of our mouth, you better think 3 times before you say it, because if you inadvertently say it, no one's around, and you make a deal, then again.
But if there was Mashiach, it would be a deal.
That's correct.
So why isn't that the standard? It's Mashiach. So all you have to do is, at the time is say, all right, let's get outside, get in the car, drive it, and we've got a deal.
Right. So look what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah gives us an example where 2 people concluded the deal because one person gave money to the other. So says the Gemara, Bishlai Rabbi Yochanan. I understand Rabbi Yochanan says why there is Mishapara, because we already have a deal. I have the money. That's all you need. Done. But the kasha is on Rosh Lakish. If Rosh Lakish says Midoraisa, the Torah mandates Mashiach. You didn't make Mashiach. Why is there a Mishapara? According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's very clear why there's a Mishapara, because he says money counts. Money transacts. It's a done deal. You can't undo it. But that's why I pointed out at the very beginning, let's look at the language of the Mishnah, because the Mishnah talks about money.
But
and
that's a
Rabbi
minority
Yochanan.
opinion. We've learned everywhere else that that is a minority opinion.
Right, but keep in mind, if Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish argue, who are Amoraim, argue on something that is in the Mishnah, that in order for you to reconcile, Rish Lakish can't say, I argue with the Mishnah. If the Mishnah says that that deal is a mishapara, then Rish Lakish has to reconcile himself to that, because he came later. He can't say, oh, I don't hold to the Mishnah. He says you need Mashiach. The Mishnah says money is enough. The kasha is, how does Rish Lakish reconcile with the Mishnah? Remember, the Mishnah says money, and Rish Lakish doesn't hold of money. He says you have to have Mashiach. So the Gemara has to give an answer to explain why Rish Lakish is still aligned with the Mishnah. And the answer is, you know what? You don't need Mashiach. Just words enough or alone. I know that's very troublesome, and it is to us.
We've spent so much time trying to disprove that, and every time we came through. And so this statement, unilaterally out of this Mishnah says, okay, we're going to change everything that we've set in stone, and we're now going to change it.
But Michael, the argument is really, how many process steps are there in order to make a deal? And the two of them don't agree on how many steps are necessary to close a deal.
Well, I don't agree with that, Jay. I think that the steps have been defined. They want to do a deal a different way than has been defined. So they want to sit and say, we're not gonna do it in the traditional way that we're going to. If we were, then we would have had a deal. But if we do it this way and we just sit and talk and promise, then we have a deal, but we can undo the deal. So we really don't have a deal if we get to the essence of it. But any other process that we've gone through has defined what is a deal and what isn't a deal. And we've spent a lot of time saying Kesef doesn't make a deal. And now all of a sudden it does.
Right. So,
but I give an example. I mean, you'd say, well, just get in the car and drive it. And normally that'll work. But let's say we're both sitting here. You came up from Florida and you tell me that, oh, that car, you test drove it a month ago. So the car. You don't need to tell. I left it down in Florida. I'm willing to sell it to you. And you say, okay, here's $1,000 and I'm going to go down tomorrow. I'm going to fly down and then I'll have a car to drive. So is the deal done? Is it not done? And so that's where this comes up.
Yeah. Look, Michael, there's no question that your thinking and your questions are on the mark in terms of, how do we keep twisting and changing sort of the permutations of the halacha? We know the halacha already. This is, in a way, and again, it's an interim thing, by the way, because we just touched on it. There's going to be a whole daf on Memches that we're going to talk about, which before we know it, Michael, may undo any of this. But let's just stick with it for a moment. We think we've reconciled every aspect of the deal because we know that you have to have a kinyan. Who ever heard of words? What does that mean, words? We have a deal. Either the chayfetz or the money. That's all we've been talking about now for the last month and two. Is it's either the money or the chayfetz, the money or the chayfetz. This is out of left field, and the reason why it's out of left field is because we can't reconcile Rish Lakish. So in a way, I understand your frustration. We already understand all of this. What are we opening the door? The teretz is we've got to find a way to make Rish Lakish come in from the cold, because Rish Lakish tells us that you have to have Mashiach, which is a legitimate argument. You have to have an event. You can't have just money, and yet the Mishnah says that if you transact with money, you get a mishapara. How does that work? Rish Lakish doesn't hold from that. That's why the Gemara came up with a twist, which we are now debating and discussing, is, wait a minute, maybe you don't really need Mashiach or an event to close a deal. Maybe merely having a conversation is enough. And Michael, you're 100% right in your analysis by saying...
One last point, Rabbi. Why would the Tanna Kama want to rely on a mishapara, which on something that is regular life and existence? Why wouldn't they put a takana in place that would rectify this and define what's there? Why would they just let this go and say God will take care?
And that's a very, very difficult question to answer, but I'm going to attempt to try to tell you that this is the essence. And again, take it for what it is. Jews don't behave the way other people behave. We have a set of rules. We follow the rules. Commerce, buy, sell. I'm an heir l'chayid. I want to do everything right. My neighbor, who's a Gentile, also wants to do everything right, and he also follows the same rules that I do in terms of buying and selling. So what's the difference between us? The difference is, say Chazal, that we answer to a higher authority. So we have to be more mindful than what the rules of the road are. Make sure that you don't, all the rules that we know about how we transact in commerce. From a Yidden, fine. Came the Chazal and they said, you know what? There's one other aspect to a commercial deal that the Gentiles, the whole world doesn't consider. And that is the Rabbeinu Shalom's satisfying the Rabbeinu Shalom that two people are being honest with each other. Doesn't exist anywhere in the world. I mean, that I know of. Doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And what is that? That's going to be the mishapara. In other words, you are an elachayid. You do everything right. You raise your kids right. You do Torah and mitzvahs. But if you misstep and say something, and that's why, by the way, even I mean, all the Musas Forum and all talk about the hanhaga, the conduct of a person in his own personal space on what he says. That's why we're so makbid on nuancing our words, not to hurt anybody, not to say something inadvertently that in other words, if a person had chas v'sholem a person who was hung, says the Chazal, if a person he had the punishment, his great grandfather was hung for a punishment for whatever it was, then doiris later, you have to have the hanhaga. You cannot, in your conversation with somebody else, reference Chanika, hanging, because maybe chas v'sholem, it's going to trigger in that person. What does it have to do with you and me? We're in 2013 or 2023. Something happened in 1980 or in 1880? So again, the Musas already writes that diburim are more powerful, right? We know that words can be more powerful than any action. Lahavdil. Look today in the world with the anti-Semitism that we're facing, is the words that people say, which have no basis, not even in anybody's reality, are very hurtful and painful. Not only that, but we suffer from it. We suffer from something that's a libel or something that someone says. That's hanhagas devarim. That's how careful we have to be as Jews, as from Jews, not to utter a word. So, Michael, what does it have to do with commerce? You and I just want to make a deal. We're not even thinking about it. The teretz is that a Jew, says the Chazal, this is why the mishapara came into being, is that a Jew has everything that everybody else has, and he has one more thing, and that is hanhagas diburim, is that his words have to count. And if he says something inadvertently that somebody else relies on, now you are hurting that other person because he had an expectation that the deal would be done. Even though it's just, you know what, it's an afterthought. I don't really like it as much. And if you say, I'm okay with it, good. If you say, I'm not okay with it, then I have no choice. I have to get out of the deal, but there's a mishapara. So I think the mishapara, again, we'll have to sort of finalize that. The mishapara is what the Chazal said separates a Yerushalayim from everybody else, even though it's not black letter law. It has nothing to do with the first 47 blot that we learned here in Bava Metzia. But now that we're talking about it, words matter. And again, let's now, hopefully next week, go through this a little bit more, because this may, Michael, may be a temporary setback. It may not be permanent. But again, in plumbing the depths of the Gemara, let's at least understand that Devarim. Now, we may never have to touch this again, or you'll see it in another sugya in Shas. Then you'll keep in mind, oh, words matter. That between two Jews, everything else halachically is correct. But if they said something to each other that can sort of upend a deal, or that matters. And that's exactly, I think, what the Chachamim were trying to do, is it was trying to add yet another twist in what is normally a commercial deal that should have very mundane, should have nothing to do with Shemayim. It's telling us it has to do with Shemayim. Shemayim is not just in Isser V'Heter, it's also in commerce, in everyday activity. So I think that's really, I mean, we've plumbed this tremendously, and there's a great discussion to be had on this. But I think at the end of the day, you're right that we had this all set before we started this morning, and then we introduced something that really has now upended all of our understandings of what we've discussed here for the last couple of months. So, but I think we'll pick this up next week, because the next line is the Gemara is going to be proving. So look at the last line of the Gemara. The Gemara says, "Mikol ba'avel." Is there really mishapara by words? V'hotanya. We learned in the Brisa. So I'm not going to get into it now, but there's a Brisa which suggests that there is no mishapara by words. In other words, here we've gone through the last hour and we've said mishapara by words. Therefore, we have to reconcile Rish Lakish. The very next line, the Gemara is going to say, "Really? You think so?" V'hotanya. We learned in the Brisa not like that. So again, it's not the final word. All I'm trying to say is, this is what expands our mind in Torah, is that we understand the view. Now we're going to look at how you undo the view, and then we're going to look at maybe we can come back and accept it. And at the end of the day, I don't want to give you a preview. At the end of the day, we're going to see how we come out with this. Is there really teeth to words? And can it override what is a fair deal between two parties, which al pi halacha is all you need, a fair deal between two parties, and we go home. Now you're telling me no? Okay, that's one of the, and that's why the Shulchan Aruch came 1,000 years later and said, wait a minute. Okay, the Gemara goes through all of this and there's an analysis, but now going forward, L'Doros, we have to have some clarity. Is there a deal? Is there not a deal? What undoes a deal? What doesn't undo a deal? Otherwise, you would be right, Michael, is that we'd have one camp that says there's a deal, and one camp says, no, there's no deal, and we'd be all over the lot. That's why we have a Shulchan Aruch, and then on top of the Shulchan Aruch, we have a Mishnah Brura and a Kitzur. I mean, we have all the halachas, and even that is not enough, because in modernity, there are questions that all those halachas don't answer. Well, we see that every day. There's a psak from the Moshe, from this one, from that one, on something that just occurred the last year or 2 years, because we never thought about it. So all of a sudden, how do we fit today's shaila into the halacha from 500 years ago? That's the great continuing challenge of Jewish law, is that it evolves, but it still is based on halacha Torah Sinai, and also the Divrei Chachamim, the words of the rabbis that we as Torah Jews accept. Again, there's a whole world out there of people who want to follow the Torah, but they're reluctant to accept Divrei Chachamim, because for the very reason that it becomes so twisted and complicated. And again, I'm not saying, but the questions that we raise today are very much the question that people ask and say, it's unsettling to me. It's unsettling to me to say that I can't sit down with you, Michael, make a deal, and then there's nothing that finalizes the deal, but I don't quite like it or whatever. And we have a deal? Well, why? Why should we have a deal? So anyway, fantastic discussion, but this is really the understanding of what Torah is and what halacha is to go back and forth. So next week we're going to start with the V'hotanya, to try to slug up everything we said today, and then we're going to see how that fits with all of our thinking. But for now, we've now right this minute we've reconciled the Mishnah between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shlakish by saying that merely that words have teeth, and therefore you don't have to have an action, not money, not mashicha, nothing, in order to make a deal. So in your thinking, at least today, you got to keep that in mind, that right now, we're in the middle, but right now, words alone seemingly have the power of putting an imprimatur on a deal that has no action to it, no physical action to it.
Yesh koach.
Okay, so